America is one of the richest nations on the planet. It is a country of immense wealth where billionaires own private islands, luxury skyscrapers dominate city skylines, and industries generate trillions of dollars. Yet, despite this abundance, hundreds of thousands of Americans sleep on the streets every night. They huddle under bridges, camp in tents along sidewalks, or move from shelter to shelter in search of a place to stay. Homelessness is not just a minor issue. It is a national crisis, one that has persisted for decades, growing worse with each passing year. More than 650,000 people are homeless on any given night, and millions more are just one missed paycheck away from joining them. The COVID-19 pandemic, rising rent prices, and stagnant wages have pushed countless families to the brink. For some, a single medical emergency can mean financial ruin. For others, job loss or domestic violence forces them onto the streets. In a nation that prides itself on prosperity and opportunity, how is it that so many people live without basic shelter? This crisis is not just about a lack of housing. It is about a failing system, one that has allowed wealth to concentrate in the hands of a few while millions struggle to survive. It is about policy failures, economic inequality, and a society that often turns its back on its most vulnerable members. To understand how we got here, we must examine the root causes of homelessness, the people affected, and the ways America continues to fail them. Most importantly, we must ask, what can be done to fix this? The rising numbers, a crisis in the making. Homelessness in America is not a new problem, but over the past few decades it has reached unprecedented levels. In the 1980s, a wave of policy changes, including budget cuts to affordable housing programs and mental health institutions, created a sharp rise in the number of people living on the streets. Since then, the numbers have continued to grow, and today, homelessness has become a fixture in nearly every American city. The statistics are staggering. More than 500,000 people experience homelessness on any given night, and that number has risen dramatically in the last decade. But the true scale of the crisis is even larger. Millions of people are housing insecure, meaning they are at constant risk of eviction, living in motels or relying on friends and family for temporary shelter. Many people believe that homelessness is only a big city problem, limited to places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York. But homelessness is everywhere, in small towns, suburbs, and rural areas. It affects all demographics, though Black, Indigenous, and other marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted. The COVID-19 pandemic only made things worse. Millions of people lost their jobs, and as eviction moratoriums expired, many found themselves without a place to live. Rising inflation and skyrocketing rent prices have made it nearly impossible for low-income families to keep up with housing costs. Homelessness is no longer just a problem for the unemployed or those with disabilities. It is affecting people who work full-time jobs but still cannot afford a place to live. The causes. Why are so many Americans homeless? At the heart of the homelessness crisis is the affordable housing shortage. In almost every major city, the cost of rent has increased dramatically, while wages have remained stagnant. A one-bedroom apartment in cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, or New York can cost well over $2,000 a month. Even in smaller cities, rents have doubled over the last decade. The federal minimum wage, which remains stuck at $7.25 an hour, has not kept up with these rising costs. Even those working full-time at $15 an hour, twice the minimum wage, often struggle to make ends meet. Public housing programs exist, but the demand far outweighs the supply. In many cities, the waiting list for affordable housing is years long, forcing many people to live in their cars, shelters, or on the streets. Beyond the housing crisis, mental health and addiction play a significant role in homelessness. Decades ago, the U.S. had more mental health institutions, but in the 1960s and 70s, many were shut down. Today, mental health services are underfunded, and those who need treatment often cannot access it. Many people struggling with conditions like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or PTSD end up on the streets simply because they have nowhere else to go. Similarly, addiction, whether to alcohol, opioids, or other substances, can make it difficult for people to maintain stable housing, and without proper rehabilitation services, the cycle continues. Another major factor contributing to homelessness is the criminal justice system. Many formerly incarcerated individuals find it nearly impossible to reintegrate into society. A criminal record makes it difficult to find housing, secure a job, or access government assistance. This leaves many ex-prisoners with no other option but to live on the streets. Similarly, medical debt is a massive problem in America. A single hospital visit can cost thousands of dollars, and many people are forced to choose between paying their medical bills or their rent. An unexpected illness or injury can easily lead to financial ruin and ultimately homelessness. Who are the homeless? Homelessness is often misunderstood. Many people assume that all homeless individuals are unemployed, addicted to drugs, or mentally ill. But the reality is far more complex. Families with children make up a significant portion of the homeless population, with many mothers fleeing domestic violence or struggling to find affordable childcare. Veterans, despite their service to the country, are also heavily affected. Many return home with PTSD, physical disabilities, or mental health challenges that make it difficult to find stable employment and housing. Another often overlooked group is the working homeless. These are people who have jobs, sometimes even multiple jobs, but still cannot afford housing. They work in fast food, retail, or even in schools, but their wages are too low to cover rent. Meanwhile, LGBTQ+ youth are disproportionately represented in the homeless population, often after being rejected by their families for their sexual orientation or gender identity. The consequences of homelessness. Homelessness doesn't just affect the people experiencing it. It impacts society as a whole. It creates a public health crisis, as people without stable housing lack access to proper medical care and sanitation. This leads to higher rates of chronic illnesses, infections, and mental health disorders, all of which put additional strain on the healthcare system. Homelessness also affects crime and safety. Many homeless individuals become victims of violence, theft, and abuse. They are frequently harassed by law enforcement and often arrested for minor offenses like loitering or public camping. At the same time, the economic costs of homelessness are massive. Cities spend billions on emergency services, policing, and shelters, temporary solutions that do little to address the root causes of the crisis. Solutions. What can be done? Despite the severity of the crisis, solutions exist. Cities like Salt Lake City and Helsinki, Finland, have shown that Housing First programs, where the homeless are given permanent housing with no preconditions, actually save money and reduce homelessness. Raising the minimum wage to a livable level would allow more people to afford housing, while expanding mental health services and addiction treatment would help those struggling with long-term challenges. Criminal justice reform could also prevent many people from becoming homeless in the first place by offering better reintegration support for those leaving prison. Perhaps the most important step is investing in affordable housing. Rent control policies, public housing projects, and stronger tenant protections could all help prevent people from falling into homelessness. But beyond government action, society as a whole must change its perspective on homelessness. Rather than seeing homeless individuals as nuisances or criminals, we must recognize their humanity and demand policies that provide real solutions. A nation's responsibility. The United States has the resources to end homelessness. The question is not whether we can do it, it's whether we are willing to. The richest country in the world should not have people sleeping on the streets. If we choose to act, we can create a future where no one is left behind. The time for change is now.